tech event. I'm really pleased to be here. I'm Rich Berliner. I'm the CEO of 5th Gen Media, and I'm putting on the Connected Tech event today. I want to thank all our panelists, and you could see they're up on the screen individually. But most of all, before we get started, I'd like to thank the sponsors and our exhibitors for participating in this and giving us the ability to let all of you view this. So thank you to the sponsors and exhibitors. And again, thank you to our panelists. Today we have Rudy Regan from Deutsche Bank, John Gilbert from Rudin, Steve Todd from Nasdaq, and Sandy Jacolow from the Meridian Group. And welcome everyone, and thank you for being here today. John, I'd like to start with you this morning. In the theme that we have here about connectivity and tech, what I'd like you to talk about is using those resources as we return to the office that we all so much want to do, but we return to a different world. And can you give us some background on what you're thinking, how it's going to work for you, and what the connectivity aspect of it and how meaningful that is for you? So, John, take it away.
Sure, thanks, Rich, and happy Earth Day to everyone. It's the 50th anniversary of Earth Day, which is pretty amazing to me when you look back on where you were on day one of Earth Day, and then it took us so many years to figure out we should be celebrating the precious Mother Earth that we all have the privilege to live on and in. I think, Rich, what's so interesting, you look at the background here and it says connected, a real estate virtual tech event. And if we don't realize right now how connected we all are, from whether it's a guy who ate a bat or virus that escaped from a lab in Wuhan that suddenly literally brought this Mother Earth to its knees, or at least the humans living on Mother Earth, then shame on us. So, as we look, and we've kind of gone past looking backwards and we're focused on looking forwards, in terms of, I just wish I had CBRS right now in my lobby, because ultimately our lobbies, in terms of the commercial office market, are changed forever. They're no longer a place where we just pass through to get to an elevator and go up. They're now going to become queuing centers. They're going to become, we're going to need greater bandwidth in our lobbies ultimately, because people are going to be waiting to get into elevators that are now limited, the number of people that you can get into, the whole visitor standpoint. Are we going to even allow visitors back into our buildings under phase one? We've got to figure out all the protocols that we all took for granted, whether it was vendors, construction workers, visitors, elevator protocols. All of that has changed. All of that has to be revisited, and that's exactly what we're doing at Rudin, so that when our customers come back, and whether it's May 16th or June 1st or some other date, that they're ready and that they will have an experience, that they will have confidence that they're safe, that they're protected, and that ultimately, as building owners, we're doing everything possible to protect them and ultimately the people that they work with. Just a simple example is, how are we going to route people in our lobbies now? It can't be this chaotic mishmash of I'm going left, you're going right. We're going to have to create routings, proper routing in terms of entrance and exits, ultimately, so people know where they should go and that they're not crossing paths with others. So, there's an infrastructure piece to that, Rich, and a big part of that is ultimately what we're going to do when 345 Park reopens. We're under renovation right now in the lobby, but we'll be the first CBRS-enabled lobby in the city of New York. And that will give our customers greater throughput. It will give us the ability to link different devices. I think it's interesting in the paper I read this morning that Westport, Connecticut, of all places, is actually using drones right now to do thermal scanning of people on the streets. So this is technology that we've seen out of China. It's very forward thinking. And how do we grab that data? How do we make sense of it? And all I can say is God bless Nantum in terms of what we've been able to use, because as the governor was ratcheting down and we were telling people they had to stay home, we literally were providing feedback as to whether people were listening or not. You know, when that final order came on March 20th that we're shutting down, we could see our occupancy data going back to March 10th, where people really started to understand and see this and stay home. So I think if there's one lesson that we have learned looking back for a minute, Rich, it's as if you're not leveraging the data that you're currently collecting in your buildings, then shame on you. Then you can't possibly direct the resources where they need to go. As we looked at, obviously, people leaving our office buildings, going to our residential buildings, we could shift resources into our multifamily residential buildings because we knew that that's where the people were, and we knew how many of them were there. So, you know, it's infrastructure, it's leveraging technology, it's leadership, and it's ultimately having a vision for where you want to go and what you need to do.
Gotcha. So, John, could you expand on the discussion of Nantum a bit? I think some of us are familiar with that, but I don't know enough to be intelligent about it. So can you talk about why you developed it, what it is, and how it works at this point?
Sure. So back in 1995, obviously, we got involved with the governor and the mayor at the time to create 55 Broad Street as the first smart building, and now called by many as the grandfather of all smart building. Fast forward to 2009, we were asked by Con Edison to be the commercial office petri dish for the smart grid demonstration project. And that was a bunch of money that President Obama had put together in terms of a stimulus package to make the grid smarter. And we walked into our first meeting and they showed us on the screen what was going on right before the lights went out in August of 2003, when 55 million people lost power. And it wasn't because there was too little supply and too much demand. It was all about the fact that the grid saw something coming at it that it didn't recognize, and it ultimately was binary and shut down. So they showed us the graph, okay, and they posed a very interesting question. We, Con Ed, had a 45-second early warning that something bad was going to happen right before the lights went out. We want to give you, Rudin, and your friendly and unfriendly competitors at least 30 seconds of that early warning. Do you want it? We're like, yeah, we can program our elevators. We take that external feed that goes to the elevator. Elevator takes that feed, goes to the nearest floor, lets everybody out. Lights still go out, but nobody gets stuck in an elevator. We walked out of that meeting, and I said to Gene Bonnyberg, I said, Gene, how the hell are we going to do that in 30 seconds? He says, I have no idea. Well, we sat down at a local pizzeria right there. We started playing mental ping pong, and I pulled out my phone, and I looked at this thing, and I said, you know what? This thing's got an operating system. Why don't our buildings have an operating system? And at that point, that's when Nantum was born. It's a brain for buildings. It grabs all the data. It creates a data lake where all that data can live and then correlate against other data sets. So as we take our occupancy data, we correlate that against fan speed so that in the middle of the day when people go to lunch, we're not pushing as much volumetric air that's conditioned, and we're using a lot less electricity. You know, Rich, we've cut our electrical consumption by 41%, our carbon by 44%, and our steam by 48%, simply by correlating data sets that we were already collecting.
And John, this is a product that it's not proprietary to Rudin. Other people can use this and be involved with Nantum also?
Yeah, we're in major real estate portfolios across the country now, largest bank in the world, largest asset manager in the world, largest REIT in the United States. We're into the utilities from a demand response standpoint, both Salt River Project in Phoenix and also the New York Power Authority. Right. So yeah, it's again, Rich, if you don't if you can't leverage your data, you can't make intelligent decisions.
Right. So I want to come back to what you talked about with CBRS, but I want to jump to Rudy and talk about what John led into, Rudy, about collecting your data and understanding what's going on in your buildings. Can you talk us through what you're doing and how you view that at this point in time? And are you have a similar view to John or a different view?
Sure, thanks, Rich. So I think we're not as mature as John is with his software and his building operating system. We are actually in pilot for those. We've deployed a number of IoT devices, primarily around utilization, so ceiling-based imaging sensors and lighting circuits, and we are moving into a new headquarters in New York and in London over the next 2 years, and plan to implement building operating systems to the complexity that John was speaking to. But currently, we're really using it for utilization, and our primary goal is to assess availability. If I go into an office and I go into an open seating area, will I have a seat? And we're also looking to improve density and reduce costs by reducing our footprint. But what we're looking at too for IoT in the future, and a lot of our sensor vendors are coming back with recommendations around how we address COVID-19. So some of the things that we're looking at are, for instance, if I reserve a seat, can our software block out seats around that to give us safe social distancing? Can we make sure that people are authorized to have a seat in a facility before they come in? And again, as John mentioned, the lobby then becomes triage. If you're not authorized to be in a building or have a seat, you don't get admittance. Can we use IoT devices, for instance, at hand washing stations to at least suggest a safe period of time for washing? So we're looking at those kinds of things, but what I'd like to do is pivot a little bit to talk about the underlying data. You know, the IoT devices are data collection. We talk a lot about data, and especially how critical it is, because data points now are health or human lives, and it's critically important. When I look at this, my expertise is IT, so I support corporate real estate, but my expertise is more around the data and the IT focus. And normally when I look at data, I look for data quality first. And there are a couple of elements to data quality. Is the data clean? Is it complete, comprehensive, timely? Is it credible data? And in looking at the current situation, I started looking at the data, looking at the sources, who's providing the data. You know, we see these every day, how many cases there are, how many deaths there are, breakdowns by countries. And the data at this point, to me, is somewhat deficient. And we hear a lot of talk about the testing and the requirements for testing, but just focusing on that for a moment, you know, if we look at the data, is it clean? Corrections are coming in all the time. There is, you know, is it comprehensive and complete? Now we're hearing that, you know, New York just added 3,100 cases where the death certificates had corona-like symptoms. So are we now bundling influenza and pneumonia with corona? There's a whole set of questions that epidemiologists and the medical professionals are going to have to answer around this, and that is how quickly is it transmitted? How does it spread? And then from that, the civic and the corporate planning professionals have to look at that and then say, is it safe to get people back into buildings? I mean, we're in a bit more control of the internal portion of the building, but how do we get people to those buildings? How safe is public transportation? So we have all of those questions that we have to resolve around the quality of data. And if the data is not good at this point, you know, bad data leads to bad decisions. So I just want to underscore, you know, you hear a lot about the need for testing, and it's critically important because the data quality that we're seeing today is not where it needs to be to make good decisions.
Right. So Rudy, before we go on to another question I wanted to ask, I want to make sure John has mentioned CBRS. We've talked about IoT and data collection. We're talking a little bit about other technologies. I'd like to encourage everyone who's listening into this and watching our panel today to go in and visit the exhibitors in our virtual trade show, because there are exhibitors that are talking about these topics. So if there are any points that anyone wants to know more about, or anyone is interested in to delve more deeply into this, we really encourage you to please visit the exhibitors, to go to the other parts of this virtual show. We have something called Meet the Experts going on. We have chat rooms. There are a number of things that you can play with in the event itself. But so Rudy, just, I understand where you're going in terms of data collection, but how does that relate to the communications overall in your building? So we know you need good data. What are you doing with that data when you do collect it, and where does it go? Where are you housing it?
Well, so internally, we have a data repository, and we are implementing a mobile communication device as part of our digital workplace. That even becomes more critically important when you have to get timely information out to employees. So it's a major factor for us. The way that we would use the data, again, are the social distancing guidelines accurate at this point? If we implement social distancing, there are two factors there. So I think that there is going to be some impact on our real estate footprint based on work from home. At this point, with Deutsche Bank, 95% of our employees globally are working from home. So we'll be returning everyone back to the office space. And I think for most organizations, they will see an increased numbers of people who are working from home. However, how much is that going to be offset by social distancing within the facility? And so there will be some type of a balance there.
Gotcha. So I want to move on to Sandy. Sandy, this is such a perfectly made situation, some catastrophe like this, for experts like you in the cybersecurity aspect of our businesses. As we just picked up and took our computers home or our laptops home, and all of a sudden everybody back in the office started thinking, oh yeah, well, there's a cybersecurity aspect to this, and we need to make sure that we've got safeguards so that we're not hacked, so that our data isn't lost, that people aren't, doing things with the data, and hackers are not getting into our systems. Can you talk us through that and what you've been through in the last month or two, and how you, as an expert in this area, look at this and say, here's how I'm going to safeguard my company?
Yeah, thanks, Rich. There are, a couple of different aspects to this. And, John and Rudy have been talking about building systems. So let's talk about that at first, because the paradigm for how those systems are maintained is completely changed. You don't have technicians walking into the building to service anything. So everything, as far as your high-tech systems, whether it be elevators, HVAC, are all going to be done remotely now. So, and it's very much similar to how you also sometimes will handle remote access from home, and we'll talk about that in a minute. But every system in your building should be on a separate VLAN, so it's its own network, and it never should be tied to your corporate network, because if one device or one system gets hacked, you don't want it spreading. So the first thing you kind of think about is containment, and that's really important. And then as you deal with getting remote access, there are a couple of different ways to secure that. On building systems, what a lot of us have done is create what basically you call jumper boxes, right? So it's basically a PC or a server that's not directly connected to the device or the network. So when I'm dialing in from home, I go to that secure administration workstation, and from there I get to the network. So I actually have literally an extra PC in the middle. So no matter what device is coming in, it's being protected by this secure access gateway, essentially. That then you want to sit there and say, okay, if it's a corporate device, it's got to be connected through a virtual private network. So it encrypts traffic, it makes sure it's secure, because one of the biggest challenges is, everybody's using random machines. You don't know what people have at home. And with that, it's encrypting the data. And when you think about that as it relates to working from home, we've had some very interesting calls. We had one person call and say, listen, our bandwidth is choppy, we're seeing sluggishness when we're working and connecting. So we started talking to the individual, And it turns out he was using the Wi-Fi from his next door neighbor. He didn't have Wi-Fi, so he was clipping onto somebody. So, first of all, it's this matter of, when people are using Wi-Fi at home, the other side of this is they have children doing homeschooling, or they have kids doing streaming. So you've got all these challenges of all these home devices on there. So we have suggested to everybody in our company, first of all, when you're home, create a separate SSID. So basically a separate wireless network that only your corporate work is on. So this way, everything that's going on with the home stuff, with the kids and the spouses and the mates, all of that is on a different network. So you're kind of segmenting all of that. Secondly, make sure it's password protected so that this way, nobody else, your neighbors can't get onto it, people can't connect to your machine. So then you start with doing, kind of this securing the actual connection. And then, as you go through securing the connection, then you have to think about securing the actual computer, right? Because a lot of people, a lot of us have given out home computers and laptops to protect, our networks, because we can deal with things like Windows updates, VPN software a lot more successfully when it's our controlled network. But when people are working on home machines, it's a very different paradigm. So one of the things that we've done is dealt with education. We've created these user guides that say, okay, this is software that you need to update. Go to Chrome. Here's how you check what version you're on, and here's how you update it. Here are some of the Windows updates that you need to do. So we're actually, layering on a level of education on top of it, because it's the wild, wild west when people are really dealing with their home computers.
So, Sandy, you and I talked about the opportunities that there are now for things like the target hacks. Mm-hmm. That, there's somebody that you have to let in to your network so that they can do some kind of repair work. But isn't that leaving a gaping hole in this whole system at this point in time? Or are you more secure than ever before because you've kind of shipped everything outside your core network?
No, I mean, in a lot of respects, Rich, the fundamentals of cybersecurity still apply, and even more so. Having, these strong passwords, using multi-factor authentication so that you can actually, validate that somebody hasn't lost a computer or a laptop. But that's why, when I mentioned before about this jump box, particularly when it comes to people outside your company, they're literally connecting through a company device that we know that has all of the antivirus, all the malware, all the scanning on it. So if their machine is not protected, because, you can't necessarily force somebody to go, put certain software on there. And even if they have antivirus software on there, maybe they don't have Windows updates, installed, because that's a continual changing game. So by coming into the jump box, which we control, that actually becomes our way of not letting their computer touch our network. So even if their computer is infected, we block it, because that computer is never really touching our network, because they're actually connecting to this jump box. And the same way from, working from home, if it's their personal computer, they cannot come in through a virtual private network. It is just forbidden. It has to be a company device. If not, what they're going to do is come through something like Citrix, where again, they are not having their computer touch our network. So we really are separating the connection points and not letting those personal devices touch our system.
Right. So we got into this discussion the other day, and I was really happy that we talked about it. So my thing has been all along, the safest way for you to come into the network would be on a VPN. And your take was different than that. And so can you tell me a little bit of that, refresh my memory on that discussion? Why is it not so secure just because you're coming through a VPN?
Well, the VPN by itself is actually very secure because it's encrypted traffic, it's point to point. You can actually control it much better. The challenge with VPN is when it's not a corporate device. So if I can take my computer and I can connect to my network, it's as if I'm sitting at my desk in the office. So my computer can talk to and see everything. I know on my corporate devices, I've got all the protection and all the monitoring. So when something happens, it gets blocked, it gets quarantined. But if somebody's just taking their home machine that their kid may be using, or somebody maybe you don't know what's on there, and it doesn't have antivirus software, it doesn't have malware software, it doesn't have monitoring. When you put that machine on the network via a VPN, you basically are putting an unsecure machine on your network, and just as if somebody walks in with their computer and plugs in. So VPN is actually very secure, but you have to make sure that the device that's connecting is secured and locked down appropriately with encryption and all the monitoring tools and securing tools that we need.
Gotcha. So thank you, Sandy. So I want to move on to you, Steve, and talk about what's going on. Sort of, if the markets are unsteady, there are many aspects of how that kind of can shake the underpinnings of our whole society. So you're a very important part of what's going on societally at this point in time. So you've got locations around the world. You certainly can opine on what it's going to take to come back. But what's the world view of what you're seeing right now? And how are you assessing what it's going to take to come back in light of the communications and the computer networks and all that?
Sure. Thanks, Rich. So obviously, yes, everyone knows what Nasdaq does, right? We're really, really good at executing and managing everything, trades very effectively, and it's all managed electronically. It's remote. We have folks in the office who are actually managing and monitoring the network itself. So we are 99% people working remotely. So obviously the markets are still operating and that still continues. So the priority right now is, so how do we take that and how do we allow employees to come back to the office safely? Tying into what John and Rudy were saying earlier is, what is that process? Because there will be employees who are at home who want to go back to the office. So similarly, we are reviewing what are those protocols, and a large element of that is partnering with John and other property owners to ensure there is alignment between what is needed for each location that fits our protocols, that then can also then be communicated to employees, because that's a big piece of the pie, in a sense of every building will be different, every protocol will be different. So how do we ensure our employees understand that and we communicate that in an informative way that allows them to access the building should they want to? And obviously, if you take property owners, Nasdaq has 4 buildings in New York City. If there was a standardization of what that lobby looks like, so just to sort of help put those things through together, that would be a tremendous help for many organizations in the city and throughout the world. And, so whenever someone gets into our space, using some of the tools that we have and what Rudy touched on, we are able to do space planning, and we are able to evaluate, okay, how many people can we populate in our offices today using and maintaining physical distancing. And it changes depending on the layouts that we have, even buildings, different floors of different layouts. It can run from 25% to 50%, just depending on the type of furniture we've got and actually how we've laid out the floors. But obviously then it's bathrooms, right? So access to bathrooms, there's bathrooms that are actually within our demise. There's bathrooms that we've shared around the world. How do we create protocols around those? And again, that's where we need to work with landlords, with other tenants. And it's really going to be a collaborative effort. And that's sort of what we got to come with. Technology is going to be driving and helping a lot of these things. So we do monitor utilization. We have tracking on that. So we do know who's in the building, who's not in the building. Everyone is an assigned seat at Nasdaq. So we're able to monitor and do this social distancing through our applications that our employees can actually access. So there is a lot of that. But, while there are folks going into the office, a large element of our workforce will remain at home. And so as a lot of force works from home, how are they going to be productive? How are they going to be innovative? Workplaces are designed to be accidental collisions, right? So how do we make it, we designed to make it conveniences are inconvenient intentionally so that those collaborations do actually happen. But how do we do that in a virtual environment where, we're not able to bring disparate teams together to have those accidental conversations? So that's something that's sort of front of mind for us. And obviously, as I think, long term, sorry, just to sort of dovetail into this, so like, how do I procure real estate around the world when I physically can't go and see it, right? Is there ability to sort of create digital twins with immersive media that allows me to sort of see the infrastructure of a building, but then also that I can visualize what is it like walking through the lobby? What does a floor plan look like, so that, you know, we can make decisions other than we have to stay where we are because that's the only building we know. So it's sort of, we have the tactical, which is the here and now, and then we have the forward look and what is the strategic and how do we provide that those technologies to,
Right. So I've lulled you all into a conversation about the importance of communications and the connectivity of everything we're doing. So I can't see the world right now in terms of, oh yeah, well, we got some cell phones and we've got a couple of Wi-Fi hotspots and you know, that's you know, my communications network. So Steve, from that standpoint, what are you looking at in terms of unified communications for all these locations around the world, for the information that you need to move from person to person? What is the current view of what you're doing? And how do you look at the connectivity piece of this and how you're going to communicate with all your troops long term?
The connectivity, obviously, that falls under our technology team. Well, the bit that I deal with is obviously workplace and the analytics tools that we have. So how do we communicate? And a lot of it is done, the executive team are communicating things directly just through email, obviously through QNets, and also through applications like Teams. So that's how information has been disseminated and communicated. From an infrastructure perspective, as I said, that sits outside my purview.
Gotcha. So I want to come back to sort of your other business aspect or the other thing you do in the industry, but I will come back to that. But I wanted to go to John and get back into the discussion that we had. And John, I think back to that first lunch we had, and we were discussing, you know, all kinds of topics, you know, what you thought of 5G, and we began the discussion about CBRS. And you mentioned it this morning when we first got started about putting CBRS into your lobby. And in my view, you've become the prophet of CBRS around the country and talking to people, and a lot of people after our Florida event picked up on it. Can you talk me through why you think CBRS may be the answer for you and how you're going to implement it in your lobbies?
Well, I don't know who said it, but a wise man once said that the greatest things in life are free. And what the Federal Communication Commission did recently was literally give for free to all property owners in the United States 150 megahertz of wireless spectrum. Now that's a huge pipe. That means you can push video, as much video as you want. That means throughput levels are unbelievable. That means if you do this throughout your building and we're able to, you know, to use CBRS enabled sensors, now suddenly I've got a network that can grab that data and bring it back directly to the Nantum operating system. A perfect example of this, you know, is the work that we're doing with David Genovese over at BlackRock at 40 East 52nd Street. Now they're the largest asset manager in the world. We're actually working with them to give them floor by floor, very granular occupancy data. And what they've been able to do, Rich, on top of all the savings that we've done on a building-wide basis, is to cut their electrical spend by another 30%. So what CBRS now brings to that is the ability to deploy sensor networks as inexpensively, because I'm not having to pay for that spectrum, right? I still have to pay for the sensors. I still have to, you know, obviously create the network, and wireless networks are always connected to optical fiber. But now when I have that network, I can get really, really granular. Number one, I can provide throughput levels in my lobbies, you know, as that Steve talked about, in terms of, okay, now suddenly people are going to be lined up. What are they going to do? They're going to pull out their phone, and are they going to be able to connect? Well, we've all been to sporting events, right? Up at Yankee Stadium or elsewhere where we've tried to connect. And since everybody else is doing the same thing, there's lousy throughput. Here we have 150 megahertz of clean wireless spectrum that can be utilized. Segment off, okay, BlackRock, you want 10 megahertz? Bingo, you got it. NFL, you want 10 megahertz? You've got it. I've still, from a building-wide standpoint, I can do everything that I want from moving video to moving data with a 10 megahertz pipe. That means I got 15 of those to play with within my building. So, gosh, I wish I had this today, because in terms of what we would be able to do in terms of messaging and wayfinding and all the digital data that we're going to have to move around these lobbies, I can't wait to utilize this spectrum. So it's a gift. It's free. Us as an industry, both real estate and working with our large commercial customers, need to come up with use cases where this can be utilized to enhance the experience and decrease the cost of occupying those buildings in the city of New York.
Gotcha. So you're right on with that. And one of the things I'd like to encourage everybody listening in, watching us, is to go to the exhibitors that are there, because there will be a lot of information about what John is talking about with CBRS, with other kinds of communications networks and adjunct. And one of the cool things is that CBRS is a good gateway to 5G. So please visit the exhibitors here at the event. And there will be some experts that will be doing chat rooms too. So John, thank you for that. So Rudy, does any of this make sense for you in terms of using these communications networks for carrying your data? Is there anything that strikes you here that's valuable for you on this?
Yeah, I mean, well, what we do is, in terms of our building networks, we totally isolate our building management systems from our data backbone. To Sandy's point, we have gateway boxes, and those will tie into a cloud environment so that our facilities management vendors can come into that cloud and operate building management systems, access them, monitor, or manage them. And we have that totally isolated from our data backbone. In some cases where we have older buildings, we do that with a VLAN. We logically segment it. But in most cases, we have physically segmented building management networks, and we're doing that in all of our newer buildings. In terms of connectivity, so I've been working with a global team for the past 10 years. Most of my development resources are in India. I have stakeholders in Singapore, Germany, London. So we have been very virtual, and Deutsche Bank has a very robust virtual environment. Typically, we would come into a desktop on demand, so we have virtual machines configured. And when we bring our own device, by going into that machine, it actually executes first a host checker, which will check my device to make sure that there is no malware, that my antivirus definitions are up to date, that it complies with certain regulations. And I can't get into the network if it doesn't fully comply. If it does let me in, what I do then is link to my internal virtual machine. So we, again, we're a bank, we have a very secure environment. I can't use things at home like my local printer attached to my computer. And that's by design. We can't use those additional resources. So there are some drawbacks, but I think they're minor in terms of security. With what Sandy was saying, I mean, the cybersecurity in this environment to me is paramount. It's such a critical concern.
Yeah, let's jump to you. And would there be, if you were advising John, are there security concerns? Are there security advantages to what he's looking to do in keeping his network, private to his users and his buildings?
Well, listen, from using CBRS, you have a lot more control over it. So you can actually control who else is on it, how it's communicating, and then use some of the same fundamental networking, some of them that, Rudy just touched upon, and some of the other ones that I did of, segmentation, different virtual networks, different SSIDs, so that you can actually control it and who comes on and who doesn't. And you're really not commingling yourself with, if somebody jumps on, your Cogent or your, any of your other backbones, it's a shared network. I mean, this way we control it all, and we have complete flexibility in how we want to manage it. So it will be more secure over time as well.
Gotcha. And so I want to jump to Steve, because there's another aspect of what you're doing aside from your your position in Nasdaq is you're running something called the Open Source Workplace, which I'm hoping that you and I get a chance to do an interview on that one of these days soon. But tell us about that and what you're doing with that and what kind of resource it is for people that might be listening in here today.
No, thank you, Rich, and I appreciate the opportunity to sort of give people a quick intro into what Open Source Workplace is. It is simply a workplace media and connection site. So we're looking to share media all around workplace. So bit HR, real estate, strategies, and that's really what the core function of the site is. Yeah. And
Gotcha.
yes, I'm hoping that you'll be able to teach me, and as we interview and I learn more about this connected wireless stuff. So it's no, I'm looking forward to chatting with you.
Gotcha. So, John, I wanted to jump back to you and talk. I've got a great question that popped up that I thought was terrific for you in terms of the CBRS. So somebody who's obviously part of this was asking this question. If you're talking about sort of free spectrum, there is an interface for CBRS that you need to go through because, again, the spectrum is really owned by the Navy. So there's an interface you have to go through. But, you know, that's the SaaS provider. And again, I know we've talked about it with Google, and Google is on a panel later in the event with us. But there are licenses that will be auctioned off so that they are yours to use. Have you thought about that at all in terms of actually maybe bidding for some of the PAL licenses and working on that? In other words, so that there is even more control that you'd have if you own that frequency per se.
Well, the way I understand it, of the 150 megahertz, they're going to auction off about 70 of that. So they're going to leave 80 megahertz back for the owner if nobody else bids. I mean, obviously in New York, people are going to bid on these things because it's very valuable. But my understanding is that from the SaaS standpoint, in terms of, and it's not software as a service, it's actually the strategic, I can't remember
the interface with the Navy and their use of the frequencies.
It's the COP, I guess you'd call it the COP, the traffic COP that's going to divert this and divert that. But my understanding is exactly what Sandy said, which is we can segment certain portions of this wireless spectrum. You know, unlike Wi-Fi, and we love Wi-Fi, it's terrific, but we've run into problems in terms of interference of this Wi-Fi network bumping up against this Wi-Fi network. The beauty of CBRS, as I understand it, is that the segmentation of that spectrum can be done so that Meridian Capital's got, you know, this 10 megahertz, Deutsche Bank's got their 10, and Nasdaq, they need more, so they've got 20. Okay, so that's 40 megahertz right there. If the net was 80, I still got 40 megahertz in which to create a wholesale wireless marketplace that then the carriers can just plug into, so that from whether I'm an AT&T, Verizon, or T-Mobile customer, I'm connected because they're lighting up the building. And if I'm a Google or Facebook or Apple or company to be named later, I can also access all of that stuff at throughputs that are 5G level throughputs. So that's the advantage of it, which is okay. Now we look at our buildings as this little cocoon, and we ultimately unleash the CBRS for the building owner. I care about IoT. I care about, and as I run my IoT network throughout my buildings, I'm not bumping up against anybody else's network, because I'm not in that, you know, unlicensed frequency. Do I own it? I don't own it, but in effect, I've been given a license, a free license by the FCC to utilize this spectrum. Right. And my only competition is the U.S. Navy. And
therein, we really, you know, that's where we decided to do this virtual event, because there are lots of questions about this. There are sponsors and exhibitors. One of them is a company that's sponsoring this panel, JMA Wireless. As a matter of fact, JMA Wireless got into manufacturing ventilators. for COVID victims recently, and there was a story about that, and so we thank them very much for being civic-minded in that sense. But there are lots of companies that will be exhibitors here that will be talking about this connectivity piece, communications, especially CBRS and 5G. So for those of you listening in that would like more information, please visit our exhibitors. I got a great Sandy question. John, thank you for that. I got a great Sandy question.
And just before you leave JMA for a second, because they deserve an extra shout out. Not only did they get into the ventilator business, but they're totally New York based. They're an upstate company doing great things. So yeah, I urge people to go talk to them.
Yep. Thank you, John. So Sandy, the question came in for you. Sorry if I missed it. Sandy is Sandy forcing full tunneling versus split tunneling for remote VPN connections? So that might as well be in Chinese for me, but are you talking about split tunneling, or are you talking about full tunneling for the VPN networks, allowing the remote user to connect to the corporate network via VPN, but also open a browser that only uses their home network firewall?
So it will depend on our corporate devices. We actually force a full tunnel, even though we have, in our case, we use Cisco AMP. So we actually have tools to monitor internet traffic and block it, because what we want to make sure that we can do by forcing it to go through our DNS monitoring tools is that they don't hit a rogue or a bad website. Particularly in this day and age, we're seeing a lot of phishing attacks where people are spoofing, they're sending you emails, asking if people are clicking on the links, they're still entering their credentials. Despite the education, people are still going to do that. By forcing the full tunnel, as soon as we know about one of these events, the security team that I have goes and blocks that URL immediately so that they can't hit it. If they're using their home internet browsing capabilities, I can't control that. I can't block it, and they could be prone to the phishing attempt. So where we can, we do enforce complete control over DNS on our corporate machines.
Yeah, Sandy, where's all this hacking traffic originating? I mean, is it just that people are taking advantage now? Because I'm getting more phishing attacks and phony messaging, and you have an invoice here, or you have a proposal that we're sending you. Where's all this stuff coming from? Is it just people taking advantage of the circumstances right now?
It's a combination of things. It literally is globally. We had one phishing attempt from Belgium yesterday that came in. It really is people just trying to take advantage of the home remote situation, the lack of sophistication, understanding that, listen, the weakest link in cybersecurity is people. And when you're home, you're dealing with your kids, you're dealing with, sharing your internet, you're on your home personal machine, which may not be as secure, you become a much easier target to attack. So it is literally people trying to do what they can, get your credentials and see what they can find.
Interesting. And is there anything specific that you're doing, just, more vigorous watching, or is there anything you're doing to try and stop it?
We're continually monitoring. Monitoring is probably the biggest point. For example, yesterday, the minute we got alerted to the phishing attack, aside from blocking the URL and the recipient, or rather the sender, we went into our tools to see who got the email. And literally within 3 minutes, they all got an email warning saying, do not open, delete. So that this way it was a communication, so that they understood right away. So monitoring and responsiveness literally is round the clock for us now. The norms that we used to have of being a support group for X number of hours has changed. It truly is 24/7, because people are working at all crazy hours, given that they're home and a lot of people don't have things to do. So it's continual monitoring and continual responsiveness in the moment.
So Steve, you must be, because of the company's position in the marketplace, you must be bombarded with that. Are you part of that ecosystem? Is that part of your part of the workplace environment? And are you subject to all of that right now?
I certainly get all the emails you're getting. Certainly exposed to that. It doesn't sit. Obviously, we have a very strict, robust cybersecurity team who do monitor everything, all everything coming in, and we get lots of training on what to do, what not to do, and what things to alert. And they test regularly on phishing. So we will get probably weekly tests at the moment on different emails coming through, and they measure response rates. Notifications then goes through to senior executives. So it is monitored and monitored very, very closely. Reports are given and scores are given. So it's senior executives are then encouraged to communicate clearly to employees what not to do.
Yeah, gotcha. And so, John, another question that came in that I think is a really important one. So with CBRS, you can't connect directly to the cell phone carriers' networks at this point. They've shown no interest whatsoever in allowing anyone to get into their network directly. So there are ways to do it through other companies, Geoverse being one, and a number of other firms that do that. But are you concerned that you're not you're not entering into the carrier's network directly, but you're going through a different source? And are you comfortable that you've got the answers in how that'll all work for you?
I think I understand it enough. There are two components: the SaaS, and then there's ultimately the brain of the thing. In terms of if we're not doing this alone, we're obviously going to partner with some smarter people than us out there in terms of this. I view this very similar to what we did in 1995 in terms of carrier neutral risers, where dark fiber was put in by Rudin into the buildings, and then the carriers could plug into that and grab their chunk of spectrum off of optical fiber or off of copper at the time. Now it's all optical fiber. So, in terms of, all I know is that from a real estate standpoint, largest asset class in the world, we have spent an enormous amount of money at calculated risk to buy dirt, dig a hole, pour a foundation, set steel and glass, pay brokers commissions to lease these buildings up. And at the end of the day, the communication rights within those buildings should fall somewhat onto property owners, and especially now with CBRS, if we can create that wholesale marketplace, we can ultimately deliver a better product, and everybody wins. Carrier wins, owner wins, tenant wins, and the IoT world wins. So that's what we're looking for. I'm not looking to replace anybody here. We're not going to become a carrier.
Got it. And so, Rudy, this is a good question for you, and I think one that will be near and dear to your heart. So the question is, radio sources for DAS are very expensive. What do you think about carrier-grade Wi-Fi for being able to connect your IoT devices, for being able to connect your building management systems? How are you viewing that?
So, Rich, I have to say that's not really in my wheelhouse. That's typically the networks team would resolve those kinds of issues. To use an older analogy, I'm responsible for the records. They build the phonographs.
Gotcha.
So I know it's an older analogy, but I think everyone on this panel can appreciate it.
It's coming back, Rudy.
It is, John, but what can I say? It works.
Gotcha. Good. Okay. Well, listen, we have another panel to go to that I need to jump because I am moderating a second panel, but we've answered all the questions that came in. I thank you all for being part of this, participating, and being so honest and open about all these topics. And thank you very much for participating. And I'm going to jump to the next panel now. I hope all of you listening in and watching will go visit our exhibitors. And again, panel, thank you very much for being here with us today.
Thank you, Rich.
Thank you, Rich.
Thank you, Rich.
Thanks, Rich.
Everybody.
Happy Earth Day, everybody.
Great. You too.
You too. Stay safe.